How's it going, y'all? It's your boy Raymond back up in here with another film video, and today we are going to be diving into a absolutely ridiculous one. Recently, I saw this movie called The Substance. It is essentially a body horror film with Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, Dennis Quaid. It's directed by Coralie Fargett? I think that's how you pronounce her name. And it is quite a wild ride. Obviously, by the title of this video, you guys can kind of figure out what we're going to be getting into here. Basically, I'm just going to share my thoughts on the film. I actually just saw this like Wednesday, and by the time this comes out, I would have been processing it through like the weekend and whatnot. Honestly, I was thinking of just like, putting this out fairly early on, but because of the insanity and the shock and just the overwhelming nature of the film, it really stuck with me like through the weekend, and I just did a whole bunch of thinking on it, talked to people about it, saw what their reactions were to it. I think I'm still fairly certain that my opinion on it wouldn't change from here on out. This film is crazy. If Challengers was like the crazy, like love triangle, sexual, horny film of the summer, this is like the body horror crazy equivalent, I guess, in some sort of way, if you could even say that. I heard a lot about this film before it came out. I was hearing a lot of buzz. People were saying it's like the goriest film of the entire year, maybe even of all time. People were saying that it was like a Cronenberg body horror type of film, comparing it to like a bunch of other stuff and saying that it was the most insane, crazy thing like ever. It was nuts. And after watching it, I can definitely say that it is some of those things. It is definitely wild and crazy and insane. It is definitely the goriest thing that I've seen this year. It's one of the goriest things I think I've possibly ever seen. And if you guys know about the movie Brain Dead, or like any of the Evil Dead movies, like those are pretty up there for just the amount of like gore and blood in those films. But this definitely is in the running if you're looking for something of that kind of vibe from a horror movie. So just to address, I'm going to kind of dive into spoiler territory just right off the bat, because this film is like rather difficult to try and talk about it without going into spoiler territory, to be honest. And I kind of wanted to go in depth on my thoughts and opinions on it, just so that, I was pretty clear with how I felt about it. And let me start with the things that I do like before we get too into like some of the crazy stuff. One, I do really appreciate the practical effects. I think the effects and the body horror imagery stuff I think is incredibly well done. It's got to be like it's probably a lot of it is like a mix of CGI with the practical effects, but it looks pretty seamless. And I gotta say, like, a lot of it is very well done, and it looks insanely gross, which was the goal anyways. I gotta give it up to like the production design team, and I gotta give it up to the special effects team as well for just making it look like absolutely bonkers and disgusting. Mission accomplished there. The other thing, the sound design. The sound design is like one of the grossest things I've ever heard. There is so much thought put into like what everything would sound like and matching like the gross visualizations of everything. Very impressive. The sound design is absolutely like disgusting and terrifying and really puts you in the perspective of the characters, which I really appreciated. The other thing, the cinematography is interesting. I think that it's most interesting when it's doing like the POV shots or during like a lot of the transformation morphine scenes. I would say a lot of that stuff is very well done. I think Demi Moore is very good, and I really appreciate that she put herself out there in this role, because it's very demanding and it's very intense, and there's a lot of prosthetic makeup stuff and just transformation stuff. Margaret Qualley as well, I think, is pretty good. She has a great couple of screams towards like the fight scene towards the end, which I think are really well done. Dennis Quaid, I think Dennis Quaid might have my favorite performance in the whole film. He is just so good at being such like a little piece of shit the entire film. Like everything that comes out of his mouth and the way that it comes out of his mouth with the portrayal is so hilarious and over the top and insane. Like, it is so funny and it is so entertaining. I think he's hilarious the entire film, and it's ridiculous. And the people in my theater, especially, like with everything that Dennis Quaid was saying on screen, any scene that he was in, we were laughing our asses off. It was awesome. This is where we have to sort of get into like the things that I don't love. I'll start with like the plot. The plot is really just guided by these different like occurrences, I guess. The structure is fairly simple, and the sequence of events is fairly simple and very predictable. Like, a lot of the stuff that was going on was so over the top, and a lot of like the inciting incidences and a lot of like the things that happened to each character just were very predictable, and I could basically see like where the film was going for essentially like the entire time. For some people that might be cool, and for some people, you know, that might be, I know for a lot of horror fans that might be fairly forgivable due to like the shock factor and due to the overall concept of everything. But for me, it just felt like I just didn't really like care which way the story was going, because everything was plotted out from the beginning. The other thing that I think is like one of the biggest selling points of the film that people were talking about is this idea of like female body representation, and the idea of like aging women, and how like women in the industry, once they reach like a certain age, essentially get like kicked out of big roles, or like getting dropped from like studios, or, you know, losing jobs, not having the same opportunities as like these younger women and whatnot. I think a lot of like the messaging that's in the film is like really, really surface level. I'm gonna be honest, because of the over the top nature of the film and the way that it's presented. Like, so much, like, there's no real opportunity that the film takes to be subtle or to dive deeper into some of the themes and concepts that it's bringing to the table. It instead decides to focus all of its attention on the body horror stuff and the gore, and a lot of like the insinuated drama of it all. You know, this film is like 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it definitely didn't really necessarily need to be that long. I get that you want to throw in all of like this crazy stuff at the end that has to do with like the monster and this like crazy ending to the film. I didn't think it really needed that, and I think you could have used the time to maybe dive into the world a little bit more. A lot of the world building is just so uninteresting, and it's just so cliche. It's just so insanely on the nose, and I know some people might really like that, and I know a lot of people were probably praising it for that reason. But for me personally, when it comes to like certain body horror stuff, and if you're going to compare it to Cronenberg, the thing that's interesting about Cronenberg and why people love him so much is because of the abstract nature of a lot of his body horror films. A lot of like the abstract nature and concepts and themes are presented in ways that sort of make you let's sort of allow you to dive deeper into those concepts in a lot of Cronenberg films. This one essentially is just body horror and gross for the sake of being gross because of the concept that they decided to go with in the film. Unfortunately, because of how consistent this concept is throughout the whole film, I don't think there was ever really like a plan for it to go any deeper than it is. And that's honestly kind of a shame, because the idea of the substance, this thing that, you know, is going around supposedly, that multiple people are like trying this like magic drug or whatever, like there's definitely something there that you could tap into and talk about. I've seen it been done before. It just doesn't decide to go above like the surface level of things, and it decides to be this like over the top, insane gore fest, which is fine. But for me, I was hoping for it to like dive a little bit deeper, but it just doesn't ever take the time to. And I guess also it like kind of goes out of its way to be so on the nose that it just like gives the middle finger to its audience, like, oh yeah, like this is what it is, and you're just going to deal with it, and you're just going to sit there and experience this crazy gore fest of a film, which is cool. And you know, I'm into like the body horror stuff. I'm into that kind of like gross aesthetic. The idea of like polarizing an audience through experiences and through what's being shown on screen and just the style of these things. But I think when you're presenting something that has this kind of concept, which could open like a world of topics that you could talk about in like the themes that you're trying to address socially, I think that it just falls flat, and there's just not a whole lot to return to other than like the shock and awe of it all. So that's really like my main problem with it, is that it's being portrayed and people are talking about it and marketing it as this bold message film that is also a body horror film, and it's like this gore fest. But I think the messaging and the concepts and the themes are kind of just shallow, and there's not really a whole lot to reach for. There's this other great film that I wanted to highlight that I was thinking of after I saw it, called The Neon Demon by Nicholas Winding Refn. It really reminded me of that film and how it tries to tackle the idea of body image and mixing that with this body horror element. But the thing that I really enjoyed about that film is about how kind of vague and abstract it is, and it sort of forces you to look a little deeper into the film, and there's a lot to really pick at there. And I think the execution of that film is a little bit more interesting. Obviously, that one's not nearly as, I guess, gory or shocking or whatnot, but I think the way that it's telling its story and the way that it's telling its message is just more interesting. And I think the similarities between the two is very interesting as well. I already mentioned the Suspiria remake, like the ending scene of that with the gore fest that was, and the styling and the music and everything like that, and the sound design. You could tell it definitely took some inspiration from that as well. That's pretty much it. I mean, overall, I would say the performances are good. I think the sound design is good. The editing is cool, and the visual effects are really good as well. I just think the story and the plot and the concepts and the messages that it has in there, I just think aren't really that well developed, and it just seems more like a gimmick than anything. I know that's probably going to piss a lot of people off. I know a lot of horror fans tend to just really dive into the shock factor, or like how much gore there is, or like the concept, or just something that seems new on the surface and the execution of it. But I think there's a lot more out there that is better done, and I think the messaging of it just isn't really that strong, and that's just my personal thoughts behind it. As a score, I think I'm still going to leave it at a 5 out of 10. I was considering possibly bumping it up to a 6. I may decide to do that at some point through some more thinking. There's still a lot of people that I know who haven't seen it yet that I would love to talk to as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely one that if you're into horror, if you're into body horror, if you're into crazy sci-fi concepts and gore, then this could be your movie. Otherwise, I don't know if I could necessarily recommend it. It is so gross, and by the end, it gets like so overwhelming and uncomfortable by the end. Like I said, I saw this on like Wednesday night, and it stuck with me through the weekend. But yeah, it's definitely one of the more polarizing films that I've seen this year, so I can definitely say that. I know this is probably not going to make some people happy, but these are just my personal thoughts, and I know a lot of people really love this film from what I've seen of the reception so far. So if you guys want to leave your comments down below, go ahead and do that. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on the film and what you guys thought about it, and be sure to like and subscribe as well. I'm going to be coming out with a couple more videos after this that I've been working on. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Yeah, that's pretty much it, and I appreciate you guys for watching and sticking around. All right. Thank you guys. See you in the next video.